Welcome to a new episode of Cheaters Always Cheat. Like, subscribe, and share to stay connected.
A long time ago, someone left me when I got really sick. But there's more to the story. It started when the doctors told me I had a serious illness called advanced Hodgkin's lymphoma. It was a big shock because I used to be really healthy, ate good food, and saw the doctor regularly. The doctors couldn't say exactly why I got sick, but they said I had a low chance of getting better without strong medicine called chemotherapy. Even though the odds were against me, I was determined to fight the sickness with everything I had. I talked to my wife, Janet, and my daughter, Layla, about it. They were really upset, but I promised them I'd do my best to get through it. I worried about how we'd manage because the doctors said the treatment would be really hard, and it might put a strain on our family. Later that night, I talked to my wife about my worries, and she promised to stay with me and help me through it all. Luckily, we had good insurance and some money saved up, so we wouldn't go broke paying for the treatment. Our house was fully paid for, and I had saved some money for Layla's college, just in case something happened to me. A week later, I started the chemotherapy, and let me tell you, it was tough. When I got back home, I felt like I'd been hit by a truck. I could hardly do anything for myself, like even walking or taking a bath. My wife and daughter did their best to help me. They brought me food, did all the chores, and took me to my appointments. But I could tell they were getting more and more frustrated with me. They seemed hesitant whenever I needed something, and even taking me to the hospital for treatment seemed to bother my wife. Things got really bad when I had an early appointment for chemo one day, and my wife didn't come downstairs to help me. She sounded tired and told me to just take a ride-sharing service to the hospital. It was weird because I'd never used one before, but I did it anyway. When I got home, I talked to my wife and daughter about how they'd been acting. I mentioned to my wife and daughter that they seemed distant lately, and I asked if they felt I was becoming a burden. My wife explained that they were simply feeling overwhelmed, and my daughter admitted she didn't expect me to need so much help. To ease the strain, I proposed hiring a nurse to come a few days a week to assist me and accompany me to chemo appointments. Additionally, I ordered a wheelchair to make moving around easier on days when I felt too weak to walk. They agreed to these ideas. Upon contacting the hospital for suggestions, they sent a kind but firm in-home nurse. She ensured I made it to my chemo appointments on time, administered my medications promptly, and even devised a care plan that included preparing healthy meals. Everything seemed to be going well, and the doctors were pleased with my progress. However, despite my reduced reliance on them, my wife and daughter still appeared discontent. My wife expressed feeling replaced by the nurse, which prompted a conversation between us. I proposed that if she could handle taking me to chemo, managing my prescriptions, and ensuring I ate and took my meds as needed, I would be willing to let go of the nurse. I reminded her that the nurse was initially hired because I was too much for her to handle alone, and she agreed to this compromise. Although she suggested a male nurse, I explained that none were available from the hospital's recommendations, and I was satisfied with the current nurse's experience and care. However, my wife wasn't open to the idea of taking on all the responsibilities the nurse was handling. She insisted that I should take care of myself more, rather than making my condition everyone else's problem. I felt frustrated because I was already doing everything I could on my own, especially on days when I could barely lift my head due to the toll chemotherapy was taking on me. Her anger escalated, leading to her slamming doors and retreating upstairs. Deciding to focus on my recovery and ignore her outbursts, I later received a call from my mother-in-law, who lived 2 states away. She questioned why I had brought another woman into her daughter's house. Although technically it's my house under my name, I chose not to dwell on that. Instead, I politely explained that I needed more help than her daughter could provide, and bringing in a nurse was necessary for my care. With at least a month of chemotherapy left, as long as the cancer didn't persist or worsen, the nurse's presence wouldn't be required for much longer. Once my mother-in-law had finally left me alone, which was all I really wanted anyway, things seemed to be going relatively smoothly for about a week following my treatment. However, on one fateful day, as I returned home from my chemotherapy session, my heart sank at the sight of a moving truck parked in front of our house. My wife, son, and daughter had packed their belongings and informed me that they were heading to my wife's mother's place indefinitely. Though I was deeply hurt and upset by their abrupt departure, I found myself too exhausted to properly express my feelings at the time. What stung even more was the timing of their departure, right after my draining chemo session. It felt incredibly cold-hearted. Seeking some understanding, I had a conversation with my daughter to inquire if this was truly what she wanted. Despite her tender age, she asserted that she felt it was better to be with her mother, as living with me had become too challenging. With tears welling up in my eyes, I watched them leave, and it was precisely the scenario I had dreaded. Feeling even more abandoned and unwanted, the timing couldn't have been worse. However, on that very day, the nurse attending to me showed extraordinary compassion, taking extra time and care. She even inquired if I had any family who could provide support, so I wouldn't have to face my challenges alone. My brother was the closest family member, albeit living 3 hours away with his own young children. Despite this, he selflessly offered to take time off work to be by my side until a more permanent solution could be found. When he arrived, he was visibly outraged by the actions of my wife, condemning her for what he saw as selfish and ungrateful behavior. He reminded me that she had never needed to work, and right after we got married, I had ensured she lacked for nothing. However, due to his own family responsibilities, my brother could only stay for a week. Yet, he didn't leave me stranded. Instead, he proposed a thoughtful solution. His wife's sister, Kara, was going through a tumultuous divorce and needed a safe haven until she could get back on her feet. Despite studying radiology at university on a scholarship, she lacked financial means, especially since her husband was the main breadwinner. Given the circumstances, my home, conveniently located near the university, presented an ideal solution. I readily agreed to accommodate Kara, assuring my brother that she wouldn't be burdened with rent, as she'd be contributing to my care. Besides, I wasn't too worried about living arrangements, as my wife and daughter had taken most of our belongings, leaving behind only the essentials. After my brother stayed for the rest of the week and left, Kara arrived on his last day. He helped her with her belongings, and she thanked me immensely for letting her stay. She promised to clean up after herself and help out wherever she could. Kara turned out to be really friendly. I assured her that she wouldn't need to do too much, as my nurse would be coming in 7 days a week instead of the usual 4. After saying goodbye to my brother, I did my best to help Kara settle in. Things went smoothly in the weeks that followed. Despite missing my wife and daughter, it seemed like I was the only one feeling that way since they didn't even call or check on me. However, Kara was a tremendous help. She handled most of the grocery shopping, cleaning, and even assisted with preparing meals without any complaints. About a month and a half after my wife left, I received the incredible news that I was cancer-free. Ringing the bell at the hospital was a major highlight for me that year. When my nurse asked what I wanted to do first now that I was essentially cured, I initiated divorce proceedings and focused on recovering from cancer, which was a journey in itself. Gradually, my strength and hair started to come back, my scars began to heal, and I started gaining weight. While mostly sticking to a healthy eating plan, I allowed myself some cheat days to enjoy my favorite meals that I hadn't had in a while. It's been 6 months since I became cancer-free, and I believe I'm finally prepared to move forward with my life. I reached out to my previous job, and they're open to rehiring me for remote work if I decide to. I'm thinking of accepting the offer since I'm planning to move away. Although I like my current house, it holds too many painful memories. I want to start anew with something smaller. While she doesn't know it yet, I intend to give the house to Kara. She supported me during my lowest moments and showed incredible kindness even though we were almost strangers. If she chooses, Kara can sell the house. I don't want any connection to it anymore, and I definitely don't want my wife or daughter claiming it. My new residence is in a peaceful rural neighborhood, and I'm excited for this fresh start. It's been more than a year since I was initially diagnosed, and I've settled well into my new home and neighborhood. There are many friendly people around, including my neighbor across the street, Dorothy, a widow who lives alone. Dorothy quickly reached out to me, and during our conversation, she shared that she lost her husband to lung cancer. If he hadn't left a good life insurance, she and her children would have faced financial struggles. In return, I shared with her about what happened with my wife and daughter. I hadn't received any communication from them, which is okay. I've moved on and been spending my time exploring new hobbies. Woodworking has captured my interest, and I'm gradually building up a collection of tools. One day, Dorothy mentioned that she saw some people hanging around my house. Thankfully, they didn't do anything harmful or steal. They approached the door, knocked a few times, wandered around the house a bit, and when nobody came out, they waited in their car for a while. Dorothy thought of calling the sheriff's office but decided not to intervene too much, considering they could have been family. Curious about their appearance, I inquired, and she described a woman in her middle years and a teenage girl. That would be my wife and daughter. I'm puzzled about how they discovered where I live, as only my brother and his wife know my address. Why would they even be searching for me now? They left nearly a year ago without looking back. Dorothy advised me that if they returned, I shouldn't go out to confront them. Instead, she said she'd find out what they wanted. This suits me well, as I have no interest in engaging with them after they abandoned me during my lowest point. Later that evening, I called my brother, and he informed me that my wife and daughter had been causing trouble around my old house, bothering Kara and her roommate. Fortunately, Kara had official records proving that the house belonged to her and was registered under her name. Evidently, she told my wife a false story, claiming that she bought the house from me. I believe it was a prudent decision not to disclose to my wife that I gave the house away, as revealing such information might have triggered a strong negative reaction from her. However, I can't help but feel a sense of remorse for Kara having to endure that uncomfortable situation. In an effort to make amends, I personally reached out to her to extend my sincere apologies. Moving forward, I'm hopeful that if my wife and daughter decide to visit again, I'll be able to resolve any lingering issues once and for all. With regards to the unilateral divorce, I find myself uncertain as to whether my wife is aware of its existence. Although my lawyer sent a copy of the divorce papers to her mother's address, there remains the possibility that they were mistakenly overlooked or disregarded as unsolicited mail. However, at this juncture, the specifics of whether or not she is informed about the divorce hold relatively little significance for me. Our marriage has concluded, and I am now channeling my energies towards embracing new beginnings and charting a course for my future. In the most recent development, my wife and daughter paid another unexpected visit to the house while I was away at work. This time, they arrived during the daytime hours, prompting me to check the security cameras to confirm their presence. Observing the footage, I noted my ex-wife's familiar visage, while Layla, my daughter, appeared noticeably older, bearing the signs of burgeoning adulthood. Following the advice offered by Dorothy, my neighbor, I opted to remain indoors, albeit positioning myself closer to the entryway in order to catch snippets of their conversation. Overhearing snippets of their dialogue, I discerned my wife inquiring about a certain individual named Richard, who she claimed used to reside at our address. The mention of this unfamiliar figure left me perplexed, and I couldn't help but wonder about the circumstances that prompted such inquiries. My wife clarified that Richard was her late husband, who, tragically, had recently passed away following an extended period of hospitalization. She further expressed her intention to ascertain whether anyone was currently occupying the premises without authorization, citing her late husband's prolonged absence as the impetus for such inquiries. The revelation that my wife believed me to be deceased left me utterly dumbfounded. As I grappled with this shocking revelation, I found myself at a loss to comprehend where she might have gleaned such misinformation. There exists no record or indication of my demise, particularly not at the medical facility where I underwent treatment for my illness. Continuing their discourse, my wife asserted her belief that, as the closest surviving relatives, she and my daughter were the rightful heirs to the property. However, my neighbor Dorothy interjected, offering a differing perspective based on her interactions with me during our time as neighbors. Drawing upon past conversations, Dorothy highlighted my disclosure of the divorce proceedings and my subsequent decision to relinquish ownership of the property. She underscored my commitment to distributing my possessions to charitable causes and emphasized my lack of any other immediate family members aside from my brother. Confronted with this newfound information, my wife and daughter were rendered momentarily speechless, their prior assertions now cast into doubt by Dorothy's revelations. Seizing upon the opportunity to assert her authority, Dorothy advised them to obtain the requisite legal documentation, namely a death certificate or a valid will, in order to substantiate their claims to ownership. Only upon providing such evidence could they proceed to the county records office to pursue the formal transfer of property deeds. My wife didn't handle the situation well at all. She aggressively confronted Dorothy, demanding to know who she thought she was and started shouting at her. She claimed Dorothy had no right to comment on anything related to her own husband. My wife told Dorothy to stay out of her business and accused her of being nosy. The entire scene was extremely embarrassing, especially since our neighbors had always been kind to me. Now, my ex-wife was causing a public disturbance and disrupting their peace. I considered stepping in to intervene and give her a piece of my mind, but I chose to stick with my plan to stay out of it. Dorothy, who is genuinely kind, apologized and explained that she was only trying to assist. She then returned to her home shortly after, and not long after that, my ex-wife and daughter left as well. After finishing work for the day, I felt compelled to go over to Dorothy's place to apologize for the earlier incident. Dorothy graciously said it was okay and mentioned that she found my wife's behavior distasteful and rather amusing. I wished I could share her amusement, but I knew my wife could become extremely angry when upset, and this was taking things too far. I reflected on how she had crossed a line, and if she returned, I would definitely confront her and insist that she let me live in peace without further disruptions. The neighborhood had always been a quiet and supportive place, and I wanted to maintain that tranquility. The situation escalated further yesterday when my ex-wife came back again. I was in my home office working with noise-canceling headphones on, so I didn't hear anything until I paused my music for a break. Suddenly, I heard a loud crash from the living room. I rushed to see what was happening and found my front window shattered. Outside, there was a commotion with people yelling. Initially, I thought there might be a crazy person causing trouble, but it turned out to be my ex-wife. She had broken the window, and my neighbors were outside trying to stop her. She had apparently been making a scene for a while, but I hadn't heard it because of my headphones. When I stepped outside, I saw two elderly neighbors attempting to prevent my ex-wife from causing more damage. Both she and Layla were holding baseball bats and had already destroyed a few of my potted plants. I grabbed her arm and demanded to know if she had lost her mind. Needless to say, she was shocked to see me in person. I firmly told both her and my daughter to leave my property before I called the police. At that moment, I wasn't aware that my neighbors had already contacted the authorities. My ex-wife seemed hurt by my words and asked why I hadn't reached out to her. She assumed that once I recovered, she and Layla would return. I explained to her that our marriage vows included supporting each other in sickness and in health, but she had broken that promise. I told her that I no longer wanted any connection with her and reminded her that she wasn't my wife anymore. I had sent the divorce papers months ago and reiterated that she needed to leave. Then she brought up our daughter, mentioning that she is heading to college next year and that I wouldn't be able to cover the tuition on my own. I told my ex-wife that our daughter also abandoned me, and I was ready to give up all parental rights. I said they should have considered the consequences before leaving me and that I didn't want anything to do with either of them anymore. This made her shift from being upset to angry. She started yelling, calling me selfish and heartless, which I found quite ironic since she's the last person who should be calling anyone selfish. I shouted back, calling her an entitled a-hole, and made it clear that she wouldn't receive any financial help from me anymore. Just then, she swung a bat at me, and that's when the police arrived. They promptly arrested both her and my daughter. When asked if I wanted to press charges, I definitely did. My ex-wife and daughter started crying loudly as they were put into the police car. I felt no sympathy for them. I had captured everything on camera, including my wife breaking the window, and had already shared the evidence with the police. After finishing work, I ordered a new window and cleaned up the shattered glass. Tomorrow, someone will come to fix it, but in the meantime, I put up a makeshift tarp to keep out the elements. Dorothy kindly provided me with buckets to hold my plants until I can replace the pots. Curious about why my ex-wife showed up unexpectedly, I did some research. I found out that her mother had passed away 2 months ago, and they discovered that the house they were staying in wasn't owned by her or her late husband but by his cousin, who decided to sell the property and kick them out. With both of my ex-wife's parents gone, she and our daughter sold most of their belongings and had been living in a motel for a while. When they returned to our former home and saw my car, they assumed I had died. They started looking for records of my possessions and purchases, which is how they found me again. They're now facing charges for vandalism, attempted break-in, and assault. Since Layla is underage, she'll receive community service, but my ex-wife will face legal consequences due to the evident premeditation. I'm considering obtaining a restraining order to ensure she doesn't bother me again for quite a while. Second story. I often wonder when I'll move past this difficult chapter of my life. I'm a 24-year-old man, and my fiancée is a 25-year-old woman. We've been in a relationship for 6 years, sharing countless memories and building a future together. I proposed to her during the COVID-19 pandemic, a time that was challenging for everyone but also a moment of deep personal significance for me. Shockingly, I later discovered that she was having an affair even when she accepted my proposal. It's hard for me to wrap my head around why anyone would accept a marriage proposal from one person while being involved with someone else. This betrayal has left me feeling confused and heartbroken. I've never been particularly smooth with women and have always been a bit awkward in social situations. However, when I met my fiancée, whom I'll call Bess, everything changed. I fell head over heels in love with her almost instantly. It was a feeling I'd never experienced before, and it was overwhelming in the best possible way. From the moment I met her, I knew she was the one I wanted to spend the rest of my life with. Strangely, she seemed to genuinely like me too. By the end of that first week, we were already discussing the possibility of having kids and moving in together. It felt like a dream come true, and I was on cloud nine. The time leading up to the day I discovered the truth about her affair was, for me, filled with joy and contentment. I thought everything was perfect between us, but clearly, it wasn't the same for Bess. One day, I happened to catch a glimpse of a message on her phone that gave me pause. Something about it seemed off, and that night, I couldn't stop thinking about it. While she was asleep, I got up and decided to go through her phone. It was a difficult decision, but I felt compelled to uncover the truth. I'm quite comfortable with technology, as I make a living by developing mobile apps. This background gave me the confidence to navigate through her phone without leaving a trace. While I'm not extremely wealthy, my job allows me enough financial stability to take a year off if needed without facing serious financial repercussions. As I scoured through her phone, I didn't find anything that definitively proved she was having an affair, but there were many suspicious signs. There were deleted messages that raised my eyebrows and a Snapchat contact with an icon indicating a high level of interaction. Additionally, there were pictures of a guy I didn't recognize, which only fueled my suspicions. Determined to get to the bottom of it, I decided to install spyware on her phone. I turned to Google, researching various options and ultimately choosing the most expensive and comprehensive service available. This was a difficult and painful step to take, but I felt it was necessary to uncover the truth and protect my heart from further betrayal. The entire experience has left me feeling lost and uncertain about the future, and I often wonder when I'll be able to move past this and find peace again. The software I installed allowed me to remotely access Bess's camera and microphone. The following day, she was set to embark on a 5-day business trip, which wasn't unusual given her sales job. However, once she left, the messages between her and the other man started flooding in. I was utterly devastated, and I vomited multiple times due to the shock of what I was reading. For a long time, I resisted accepting the reality of the situation, but eventually, I became fixated and started delving into anything I could access. I discovered that their affair had begun more than 2 months before I proposed. Her affair partner, a coworker, was a married man 10 years older than her, with 3 children, and his wife was 7 months pregnant at the time. The ultimate blow came when I could hear them being intimate in a hotel room. They professed their love for each other, disparaged both me and his wife, and even discussed the idea of running away to start a new family together. This utterly devastated me, and I was at a loss regarding what to do next. I didn't have the courage to call and confront her directly. Eventually, I reached out to my childhood best friend, whom I'll call Kay. Kay grew up in a Brazilian favela and was tough as nails. He and his mother moved next door to me in the UK when I was 12. Kay's father had passed away a few years prior, although he never talked about it much. His mother explained that he died due to a random act of violence. My own mother left when I was 10 due to a pill addiction, and my father never remarried. Despite Kay not knowing any English when he first arrived, we became close friends over that first summer, learning each other's languages to some extent. We bonded strongly due to our shared traumas. Kay and I have been inseparable ever since, which is a bit odd given that I'm a conflict-avoidant and socially awkward nerd, while Kay is popular and fearless. He's not particularly large or muscular but is undoubtedly tough. Kay is widely loved. During high school, someone organized a surprise party for him, and a whopping 250 people attended. Meanwhile, I can probably count my friends on one hand, and even then, 3 of them are more acquaintances than true friends. I confided in Kay, showing him all the messages and emails I had discovered. He stayed silent for a long time before telling me he couldn't give specific advice because this was something I needed to resolve myself. I had to handle it in a way that felt right for me. He then shared his own experience of being cheated on, explaining how he exposed the girl to her family and friends and cut off all contact with her. I was completely lost, and Kay's suggestion was the only guidance I had. I told him I wanted to do something similar with Bess. In the following days, we gathered all of Bess's belongings and moved them to a storage unit. We changed the locks on my apartment and prepared to pick her up from the airport. Thankfully, Kay was the one driving because my hands were trembling too much. When Bess got into the car, she immediately sensed something was wrong despite her cheerful demeanor. I simply told her I wasn't feeling well, while Kay, smiling, mentioned that I had a fun surprise planned for her at her parents' house. Throughout the ride, I stayed silent, avoiding eye contact and trying to fake a smile. From the moment Bess entered the car, the day seemed to unfold in slow motion. The previous day, I had informed her parents that we were coming over and that I had a big announcement to make. When we arrived, there were warm hugs and smiles, and I almost lost my nerve. I genuinely cared for her parents. They had always treated me well and made me feel like part of the family. Soon, Bess was sitting on the couch between her parents. When someone asked about the big surprise, Kay encouraged me to proceed. I started by expressing my deep gratitude to her parents for their kindness and for making me feel like part of the family. Then, overcome with emotion, I struggled to speak for a few minutes. Despite having a well-prepared, eloquent speech, I blanked out and blurted, "Bess has been cheating on me with a coworker who has children, and his wife is 7 months pregnant. The engagement is off, the wedding is off, and our relationship is over. Bess, your belongings are in this storage unit." I dropped the key on the floor and said, "This is a permanent goodbye." I left while everyone sat in stunned silence. I heard Kay telling them I needed time to heal and to contact me only if absolutely necessary. In the car, Kay suggested I post a message in the Facebook group where we had been organizing the wedding. Everyone was in that group, my family, her family, friends, everyone. I posted a brief message similar to what I had told her parents and then left the group. Kay kept telling me he was proud of me and reassured me that one day I would be glad I stood up for myself. I was in shock. Nothing about this situation felt positive or even real. Our next planned stop was at the home of the coworker's wife. When I knocked on her door, I wasted no time in blurting out everything without even bothering to introduce myself. I'm almost certain she slapped me at some point as I handed over a thumb drive filled with evidence. Her husband appeared behind her, and she immediately began shouting at him to leave and not come near her. He tried to give excuses, but the moment he took a step forward, Kay was in his face, telling him to get out. After some arguing, he eventually packed a bag and left. While Kay spoke with his wife, I tried to process the chaos my life had become. Eventually, we were invited inside, and Kay arranged for us to spend the night until her father could come pick her up the next morning. She was afraid her husband might return, and she didn't want to be alone. Once indoors, I felt invisible. Nobody acknowledged me. I sat there quietly weeping, understanding that her situation was more dire than mine, but still hurt that I went unnoticed. Everyone eventually fell asleep, but I stayed awake, shedding tears through the night. I contemplated ending my life. I searched for pills, but found none. In the end, I grabbed a long tool with the intention of pushing it into my heart. With trembling hands, I held it against my chest and took a deep breath, but only managed to nudge it slightly under my rib cage. I can't recall how long I stood there before leaving the tool on the table and returning to my seat, where I cried until morning. When her father arrived at 5:30 a.m., I welcomed him in, looking disheveled and defeated. He remained surprisingly calm as he asked me questions, though my responses were incoherent. After checking on his daughter, he left, and I collapsed. I awoke in the hospital 3 months ago. Kay stayed with me initially, fearing I might attempt self-harm again. Since then, I've had no contact with my ex-fiancée. I changed my contact details and blocked her on all social platforms. Despite her persistent visits, where she begs for forgiveness and claims to have ended things with the other man, I remain silent, listening through the door while tears streamed down my face. I'm unable to find solace, consumed by anger, hatred, and shame. I realize I can never return to her, as it would utterly destroy what little self-respect I have left. The confrontation at her parents' house and informing the other man's wife brought me no relief. If anything, I regret not simply walking away from it all. People say that eventually, you become numb or different. I hope that day comes soon for me because right now, every day feels like a living nightmare. Update: I eventually decided to approach her parents to see if they could help stop her from coming to my door. Honestly, I don't care about her reasons or desires anymore. I've realized that how I perceived her and who she truly is are two different things. At this point, I just want her out of my life so I can move on. Maybe I'll get a cat or something for company. Before I could talk to her parents, her dad unexpectedly showed up at my door. He brought a 6-pack of my favorite beer and asked if we could chat. I agreed but suggested we walk while talking. I didn't want him inside, not just because my apartment was messy and reflected my state of mind, but also to avoid the risk of her showing up suddenly. Plus, if things got awkward, I didn't want to ask him to leave as confrontation isn't my thing. He opened a couple of beers and started talking. He began by apologizing on behalf of his daughter. Then he shared that his wife and daughter had urged him to talk to me and convince me to speak to his daughter. However, he made it clear he had no intention of doing so. In fact, he supported the decisions and actions I had taken. He mentioned that his daughter had become spoiled and selfish, and he hoped she would face the consequences of her actions and learn from them in the future. Then things took a strange turn. He started asking me a lot of questions about how I was doing. The questions were quite pointed, and it was evident he was hoping I was in a lot of pain. It seemed like he expected me to be suffering greatly, and he might have even found some satisfaction in that. I felt really disturbed by this situation, so I chose to do the opposite by telling him that I've moved past his daughter and her actions don't affect me much. I expressed that I'm content and looking ahead positively. His reaction to my response was peculiar and disappointing, leaving me puzzled about his demeanor. Then, he began discussing my ex's distress, but his manner of speaking seemed off, almost as if he took some hidden pleasure or satisfaction from it, despite his attempts to conceal it. At that moment, I decided to leave promptly, fabricating an excuse and bidding farewell hastily. I've officially closed the chapter with my ex now, thanks to the guidance I received from online strangers. Despite enduring some pain and a blow to my self-esteem, I'm now ready to release the past and forge ahead. Many of the insights shared by strangers online resonated with me. I believe I successfully sidestepped a serious issue, not only with my ex but potentially with her family too. It's unsettling to think about a father finding joy in witnessing his own child suffering. After reflecting on the feedback from my previous post, I came to realize that I may have misunderstood the dynamics with her father. He has consistently treated me well, and I hold him in high regard. Consequently, I decided to initiate a conversation with him. It became evident that the questions he posed were leading, aiming to gauge the possibility of reconciliation between his daughter and me. He expressed hope for such an outcome, acknowledging my positive influence on her. Interestingly, he also conceded that she didn't deserve me, which gave a boost to my self-esteem. His smiling demeanor while discussing his daughter stemmed from a long-standing disagreement with his wife regarding her upbringing. He often warned his wife about the repercussions of indulging their daughter, regretting his acquiescence to her decisions on this matter. His anticipation seemed driven by the prospect of proving his wife wrong. Directly addressing any concerns between us, I inquired if everything was all right, to which he reassured me that there were no issues. In a light-hearted manner, he joked about contemplating a divorce, hinting at the challenges he faced in confronting his wife and daughter. Despite this, he expressed firm resolve not to yield this time, indicating a confrontation that had been brewing for some time. As for Kay, his steadfast support has been unwavering. Throughout, he has remained by my side, offering encouragement. Now that I've distanced myself from the situation, I can appreciate the wisdom in his belief that I would eventually find pride in my actions. I had a rare moment of standing up for myself, something I don't do often, and it's left me feeling incredibly empowered. It's a significant shift for me, and I'm confident that I'll be able to assert myself similarly in the future if the situation calls for it. Recently, my ex showed up at my door again, and for the first time, I decided to engage in a conversation with her. She pleaded with me to let her in so we could talk, but I wasn't willing to engage with her on her terms. If we were going to have a conversation, it had to be under conditions I set. Despite her insistence, I stood my ground, knowing that my self-respect was at stake. Eventually, we agreed to talk, but I made it clear that it would be on my terms. I suggested meeting at a local park in half an hour. Part of my reasoning was that I didn't want her inside my messy place, but also, as some of you pointed out, meeting her alone could potentially protect me from any false accusations. Interestingly, despite the gravity of the situation, I didn't feel nervous at all. In fact, I felt strangely good, confident, even. It was a rare feeling for me, but one that I welcomed wholeheartedly. When we met at the park, she was visibly upset, crying as we sat down to talk. Initially, we exchanged trivial small talk, but as she attempted to pry into private matters, I firmly reminded her that our conversation was between her and me and wasn't her concern. It was essential to establish boundaries from the start. As the conversation progressed, she launched into a lengthy monologue that lasted about an hour. She expressed deep remorse for her actions, telling me how sorry she was and how much she loved me. Despite her heartfelt pleas, I remained resolute. She begged for reconciliation, willing to do anything to make amends. While I found it in myself to forgive her, I made it abundantly clear that reuniting was completely out of the question. Her actions had fundamentally altered my perception of her, revealing a side of her that I couldn't reconcile with my values. People who truly care for others don't behave the way she did towards me, and her actions have proven that she isn't a kind person. Trusting her again is simply impossible for me. I explained to her that I aspire to share my life with someone who embodies kindness, trustworthiness, and genuine love and respect for me. Unfortunately, due to her actions, she no longer fits that role in my life. As she cried uncontrollably, I found myself surprisingly detached, observing her emotional turmoil with a sense of indifference I had never experienced before. It was a strange feeling, one that caught me off guard, but it reinforced my conviction that moving on from this relationship was the right decision. Ultimately, I called her father to come pick her up, expressing hope that she seeks counseling to mend whatever is broken within her. Despite my efforts to offer encouragement and support, she didn't seem receptive to the idea of seeking help. After explaining the situation to her father, I wished her well and good luck, knowing that her journey towards healing would be a challenging one. Then, I decided to focus on something positive, adopting a kitten from the local animal shelter. I named the kitten Shiny, as a reminder of the courage I found within myself to stand up for what I believe in. It's a small symbol, but a meaningful one nonetheless. As I've been spending time with my new furry friend, I've found solace and joy in the simple moments we share together. Later, a friend is coming over for video games and beers, and I'm looking forward to unwinding and enjoying their company. While I feel a sense of sadness and pity for my ex, I'm also relieved that this chapter of my life is finally closed. I'm grateful for the difficult truths that some of you shared with me. They were exactly what I needed to hear to move forward.
Don't forget to subscribe, like, and click on the little bell icon for notifications of new stories.